Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here and joining us for tonight's event. This is the final event in our AAWW at 30 retrospective series, and we're capping off the season of celebrating our 30th anniversary, and so thrilled that you could join us tonight. My name is Jeffrey Nudin. I am the Executive Director of the Asian American Writers Workshop, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our virtual stage tonight. Do say hi, let us know in the chat where you are signing in from. For those of you who are new to the workshop in our 30th year, we are a national nonprofit organization dedicated to amplifying Asian and Asian diasporic storytelling. The workshop was founded in 1991 by friends Curtis Chin, Christina Chu, Marie Myung-guk Lee, and Bino Realio, who came together to create an inclusive and supportive community space from writers across the Asian diaspora. Our retrospective series, AAWW at 30, has explored the values and ideas that lie at the heart of the workshop's mission and that have driven us for the past 30 years. From the complexities of representation, to the need for an artistic home, to interrogating our editorial legacies, and our archive, this series of events has served not only as a retrospective of our rich and layered history, it's also served as a resounding call to envision our future and what lies ahead. You can watch any of the programs that you may have missed on our YouTube channel, and you can read our AAWW at 30 notebook, which is currently being published in the digital magazine at aaww.org. Programs like this wouldn't be possible without the support of our community. You can donate to support many more years of the workshop and our programming at the link that we are sharing now in the Zoom chat. So here's to 30 more years. Tonight we are joined by friends of the workshop, partners in crime, people who have been with us through thick and thin over the course of the past 3 decades. Amitabha Kumar, Monica Yoon, Alexander Chee, Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni, and Hua Su. Amitabha, Monica, Alexander, and Chitra will read works from our archive and will share more about their own experiences at the workshop. And then we'll all be joined in a group conversation moderated by Hua Su. During tonight's event, we ask that all audience members practice nonviolence in the chat. Comments that are racist, transphobic, homophobic, ableist, and/or misogynist will be flagged, and the person will be removed from the event. So the way it's going to work is I'm going to call one of our speakers up at a time to our virtual stage. They'll read a selection from our editorial archive. And then at the end, we'll all convene as a group for a conversation. So we're going to kick things off with Monica Yoon. Please join me in welcoming Monica. Monica will be reading If You Want to Know What We Are by the Filipino novelist and poet Carlos Bulosan. Monica Yoon is the author of 3 books of poetry, Blackacre, Ignatz, and Barter. Blackacre was awarded the William Carlos Williams Prize, and she has been a finalist for the National Book Award, the National Book Critics Circle Award, and the Kingsley Tufts Award. She's been awarded the Levinson Prize from the Poetry Foundation, a Guggenheim Fellowship, a Witter-Bitter Fellowship from the Library of Congress, and a Stegner Fellowship, among other honors. If You Want to Know What We Are was collected in the workshop's first print anthology, Quiet Fire, which collected Asian American poetry from 1892 to 1970 and was edited by Juliana Chang and published in 1996. Monica, over to you.
Hi, Jeffrey, and thanks so much for having me. And I'm very happy to kick off this event by putting Carlos Bulosan's voice in the room. For those of you not yet familiar with his work, he lived from 1913 to 1956. He emigrated to the US in 1930 and became very active in the labor movement on the West Coast, started publishing his writing, and was eventually blacklisted and died in his early 40s in poverty. But a lot of his work was posthumously discovered, and so I'm happy to be starting with this poem, If You Want to Know What We Are. If you want to know what we are who inhabit forest, mountain, river shore, who harness beast, living steel, martial music, that classless language of the heart, who celebrate labor, wisdom of the mind, peace of the blood. If you want to know what we are, who become animate at the rain's metallic ring, the stone's accumulated strength, who tremble in the wind's blossoming that enervates earth's potentialities, who stir just as flowers unfold to the sun. If you want to know what we are, who grow powerful and deathless in countless counterparts, each part pregnant with hope, each hope supreme, each supremacy classless, each classlessness nourished by unlimited splendor of comradeship. We are multitudes the world over, millions everywhere in violent factories, sordid tenements, crowded cities, in skies and seas and rivers, in lands everywhere. Our numbers increase as the wide world revolves and increases arrogance, hunger, disease, and death. We are the men and women reading books, searching in the pages of history for the lost word, the key to the mystery of living peace, imperishable joy. We are factory hands, field hands, mill hands everywhere, molding, creating, building structures, forging ahead, reaching for the future, nourished in the heart. We are doctors, scientists, chemists, discovering, eliminating disease and hunger and antagonisms. We are soldiers, Navy men, citizens guarding the imperishable will of man to live in grandeur. We are the living dream of dead men everywhere, the unquenchable truth that class memories create to stagger the infamous world with prophecies of unlimited happiness, a deathless humanity. We are the living and the dead men everywhere. 2. If you want to know what we are, observe the bloody club smashing heads, the bayonet penetrating hallowed breasts, giving no mercy. Watch the bullet crashing upon armorless citizens. Look at the tear gas choking the weakened lung. If you want to know what we are, see the lynch trees blossoming, the hysterical mob rioting. Remember that prisoner beaten by detectives to confess a crime he did not commit because he was honest, and who stood alone before a rabid jury of 10 men, and who was sentenced to hang by a judge whose bourgeois arrogance betrayed the office he claimed his own. Name the marked man, the violator of secrets. Observe the banker, the gangster, the monster who kill and go free. We are the sufferers who suffer from natural love of man for man, who commemorate the humanities of every man. We are the toilers who toil to make the starved earth a place of abundance, who transform abundance into deathless fragrance. We are the desires of anonymous men everywhere, who impregnate the wide earth's lustrous wealth with a gleaming fluorescence. We are the new thoughts and the new foundations, the new verdure of the mind. We are the new hope, new joy, life everywhere. We are the vision and the star, the quietus of pain. We are the terminals of inquisition, the hiatuses of a new crusade. We are the subterranean subways of suffering. We are the will of dignities. We are the living testament of a flowering race. If you want to know what we are revolution.
Thank you so much, Monica. Next up, please welcome novelist Alexander Chee. Alex Chee is the best-selling author of the novels Edinburgh and the Queen of the Night and the essay collection How to Write an Autobiographical Novel. He is a 2021 United States Artists Fellow, a 2021 Guggenheim Fellow in Nonfiction, and the recipient of the Whiting Award, an NEA Fellowship, an MCCA Fellowship, the Randy Schultz Prize in Gay Nonfiction, the Paul Engel Prize, the Lambda Editor's Choice Prize, and residency fellowships from the MacDowell Colony, the VCCA, Leydig House, Civitella Ranieri, and Amtrak. Alex will read Faith by the late Malaysian-American poet, essayist, and performer Justin Chin. Faith was published in the workshop anthology Take Out: Queer Writing from Asian Pacific America, which was edited by Quang Bao and Hanya Yanagihara. Alex, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey, and thank you for inviting these voices into this celebration of the anniversary. I met Justin Chin so long ago. I just have like a distant memory of him kind of slouched in a corner, kind of taking everything in the room in, and I'm kind of thinking of that image of him as I start this. Takeout was a momentous anthology, and it was a really significant thing that the Asian American Writers Workshop did. It meant a lot to all of us who were in it, which includes me, and to many others who found it over the years. Faith. Lisa gives me a bracelet, a Buddhist trinket she got when her family went to a temple, accustomed to see the beginning of each year. A delicate thing, beautiful in its symmetry. 18 beads, the unruffled color of Chihuahua puppy's tan fur, 2 transparent beads on each side, 7 more tan beads each. And in the center, a large white bead holding a convex corneal slip of plastic. A white eyeball that reveals, when you hold it up to the light, Buddha in his slippers. If my mother ever saw me wearing this, she would be gravely upset, grieved. This small trinket troubling her firm Christian beliefs, those she inculcated in her sons. I do not practice Buddhism. A charm has only as much power as one puts into it. I wear it because it is such a pretty thing, and the person who gave it to me cared enough for my protection, a reason greater than any faith. Once, in a Chinese restaurant, I saw a group of school kids kick the shrine sitting beside the fridge. A pot of joss sticks, the teacups tumbled over, and the oranges scattered across the floor. The fat, laughing Buddha fell face down, as if doubled over in hysterics. The perpetrators of this horror were angered by the shop proprietor's refusal to serve them. But did they not realize what they had done? Were they not afraid? It was not the proprietor's faith in his God's powers to take retribution greater than the boy's faith, but the God they had kicked was powerless. I'm told tales where Buddhist shrines, Hindu temples, voodoo floats, Christian crosses were desecrated, and the persons responsible came to mysterious and disastrous ends. Can faith equal faith? Is there any equivalence? Or are we weighing elephants against toenails? What exists in our world that would allow us to measure such inequivalence, to balance the scales of culture, faith, and fear? Many months ago, I believed that my room was haunted. I felt a presence sitting on my bed, and the cat was sleeping in her sweet purr on the porch. I tried to wake, but felt held down by an invisible force, my head pressed against the pillow, my voice taken away from me. I could not even call out to wake myself up. All I could do was pray in my mind, and pray I did. I suddenly awoke in a dark, still room. This is how I know I still believed in the God of my youth. Can faith equal faith? Do gods of one faith take care of the believers of other faiths? Who will protect my God when he falters and his faith fails? Do the gods of one faith take care of the gods of other faiths? Can it change the spleen of our lives, of what we've seen and done and what has been done to us? Look to Job, family decimated, crushed under 8 tons of party lights, lost, scabbed, ill and tempted, patient, unquestioning, and faithful. Idiot simple it sometimes seems. Never mind earthquakes, floods, storms, collapsed buildings, serial killers, car accidents, famine, endless war, another car bombing, pestilence, flesh-eating bacteria, untold hatred, the unforgivable, forgetfulness, revisionism. Here is my bloodstained faith on my wrist, in these boxes of pills, in this blood test, tubes of scarlet proof. In this inoculation, dead cells of ancient diseases flow the fur pelt of the dog and bit right through to the bone and brain. It is in this string of obituaries, this book I am yet to read, this newspaper, these words, this cure, these half-truths that burst into full truths, these lies that rot into complacency, the memory of all the dead and the living behind and in front of me. This is my bloodstained faith.
Thank you so much, Alex. Next up, please join me in welcoming Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni. Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni is an award-winning and best-selling author, poet, activist, and teacher of writing. She is the McDavid Professor of Creative Writing at the University of Houston. Her work has been published in over 50 magazines, including the Atlantic Monthly and the New Yorker. And her writing has been included in over 50 anthologies, including Best American Short Stories, O. Henry Prize Stories, and the Pushcart Prize Anthology. Chitra will be reading an excerpt of Mina Alexander's poem, San Andreas Fault, which was published in the workshop anthology Contours of the Heart, South Asians Map North America, edited by Sunaina Mehra and Rajni Shrikant. Chitra, over to you.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure for me to be part of this reading, celebrating 30 years of the workshop. And I have so many memories of this anthology, which I have right here. And I'm included in it, as well as Mina Alexander and several of the people who are being read today, and Amitabh's work is here also. It was a big moment when this anthology came out. It was just, I felt it was quite groundbreaking. And in the course of it being published, I became friends with Sunaina Mehra and Rajni Shrikant as well. So I think the workshop has done so much to bring communities together, writers together, to get us to know each other and to learn from each other's work. I remember that right around the time this anthology was being published, I came to New York for the publication of one of my novels. And I met Mina. I interviewed her for one of the Indian magazines, India Currents. And I remember how gracious she was, because I was just starting off as a writer, and she was very encouraging. So it is a great pleasure for me to read part of San Andreas Fault. I'm going to read the first 3 sections. San Andreas Fault. And the epigraph reads, "And if I cried, who'd listen to me in those angelic orders?" From Rilke. Part 1, The Apparition. Too hard to recall each grass blade, burn of cloud in the monsoon sky, each catamaran's black sail. Nor very easily could we make ourselves whole through supplication, before and after the jagged rasp of time, cooled by winds brushing the Pacific. The brown heart rocking, rocking, ribs dashed to the edge of San Andreas Fault. Suddenly I saw her, swathed in silk, seemingly weightless, nails prized into rock, rubber boots dangling over the gorge. This morning light over water drives everything out of mind. Don't you agree? I know the Ganga is like nothing else on earth, but now I fish here. San Andreas suits me, salmon, sea perch, striped bass. Montara, Moss Beach, Pescadero, Half Moon Bay, North American names quiver and flee. Pink shrubs, stalks of the madrone, speckled heather rooting in clumps, and under it all the fault her voice worked free. Saw him walking with you, holding hands in sunlight, two of you against a wall, hands, face, eyes, all shining. He had a brown paper bag, you nothing. How come? Feet hot against madrone roots, veins beating indigo to the rift where her thighs hung, musically, unbuckling gravity. I set my face to her squarely. Come to America so recently, what would you have me carry in my hands? In any case, why bring in a man I hardly see anymore? 2. Flat canvas. Once, waiting for him in the parking lot, right by the tap and muddied pool where wild dogs congregate, he was often late. I let the sunlight bathe my face, seared into water, saw myself doubled, split, a stick figure, two arms bloodied with a bundle racing past parked cars of third world immigrants. Then I saw him sprinting by my side. Teeth, 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 he cried, his body bolted down, a dream by Basquiat, flat canvas, three-pronged heart, broken skull laced with spit, skin stretched over a skeleton pierced with nails, Gray's Anatomy in one hand, in the other, the Bible. In Malayalam, Hindi, Arabic, French, he cried out, turning to English last, babbling as the continental coast broke free, riveting before and after, jump-starting reflection, the angel of death, dread, wings blown back, neck twisted over mounds of rubble, doorposts with blood of the lamb smeared on, and faintly visible under jarring red words like progress, peace, brotherly love, one nation under God, all that stuff. 3. Funeral song. I sensed his breath on my neck. He needed to suck me into eternity, press thumbs against my throat, set a paper bag against my thighs, warm with the hot dog he got on the cheap from the corner store by the supermarket wall. A real American hot dog, sauerkraut and all, he boasted, till tears took hold. He pressed me tight against a tree, in full sight of an Indian family struggling with their groceries, thrusting harder as breath came in spurts, a funeral song he learned from his mother, the words from Aswan filling me. You have crossed a border, never to return. Stranger in this soil, who will grant you burial? Neck of my beloved, who will grant you burial? Eyes, lips, nose, who will shield you from sight? Tighter and tighter he squashed me, till the fruits of the fig tree broke loose, and fit to faint, I thrust my fist through his blue cotton shirt, cast myself free. Thank you. And thank you, Mina Alexander. I remember you.
Thank you, Chitra, for that beautiful reading. For our final reading tonight, please join me in welcoming Amitabha Kumar on screen. Amitabha Kumar is a writer and journalist. He was born in Aaha and grew up in the nearby town of Patna, famous for its corruption, crushing poverty, and delicious mangoes. Kumar is the author of several books of nonfiction and 3 novels. In 2016, Amitabha Kumar was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship, as well as a Ford Fellowship in Literature from United States Artists. He's also been awarded writing residencies by Yaddo, McDowell Colony, the Rockefeller Foundation at Bellagio, the Norman Mailer Writing Center, Writers Omi at Ledig House, and the Lannan Foundation. Amitabha will be reading the poem Snow on the Desert by the Kashmiri American poet Aaha Shahidali. Snow on the Desert was also published in the anthology Contours of the Heart, South Asians Map North America, edited by Sunana Mehra and Rajni Shrikant. Amitabha, over to you.
Thank you. You know, we are trying to read and remember all those who have passed. And Aaha Shahidali was a marvelous poet and a translator. He translated Faz, and I think he popularized the form of the ghazal in American and Western circles. About 25 years ago, when India and Pakistan were celebrating 50 years of independence, I remember reading with him in New York. We might have done a reading at, you know, the Asian American Writers Workshop too. Maybe I bought this book, The Country Without a Post Office. Marvelous, marvelous poems there from the workshop. But here is his poem, Snow on the Desert by Aaha Shahidali. Each ray of sunshine is 7 minutes old. Serge told me in New York one December night. So when I look at the sky, I see the past? Yes, yes, he said, especially on a clear day. On January 19, 1987, as I, very early in the morning, drove my sister to Tucson International, suddenly, on Alvernon and 22nd Street, the sliding doors of the fog were opened, and the snow, which had fallen all night, now sun-dazzled, blinded us. The earth whitened out as if by cocaine. The desert's plants, its mineral hard colors extinguished. Wine frozen in the veins of the cactus. The desert smells like rain. In it, I read, the syrup from which sacred wine is made is extracted from the saguaros each summer. The Papagos place it in jars where the last of it softens, then darkens into a color of blood, though it tastes strangely sweet, almost white, like a dry wine. As I tell Samita this, we are still 7 miles away. And you know, the flowers of the saguaros bloom only at night. We are driving slowly. The road is glass. Imagine where we are was a sea once. Just imagine. The sky is relentlessly sapphire, and the past is happening quickly. The saguaros have opened themselves, stretched out their arms to raise millions of years old. In each ray, a secret of the planet's origin, the rays hurting each cactus into memory, a human memory, for they are human, the Papagos say, not only because they have arms and veins and secrets, but because they too are a tribe, vulnerable to massacre. It is like the end, perhaps the beginning of the world, Samita says, staring at their snow-sleeved arms. And we are driving by the ocean that evaporated here, by its shores, the past now happening so quickly that each stoplight hurts us into memory. The sky taking rapid notes on us as we turn at Tucson Boulevard and drive into the airport. And I realize that the earth is thawing from longing into longing, and that we are being forgotten by those arms. At the airport, I stared after her place till the window was again a mirror. As I drove back to the foothills, the fog shut its door behind me on Alvernon, and I breathed the dry seas. The earth had lost their forsaken shores, and I remembered another moment that refers only to itself. In New Delhi one night, as Begum Akhtar sang, the lights went out. It was perhaps during the Bangladesh war. Perhaps there were sirens, air raid warnings, but the audience hushed, did not stir. The microphone was dead, but she went on singing, and her voice was coming from far away, as if she had already died. And just before the lights did flood her again, melting the frost of her diamond into rays, it was like this, turning dark, a fog, a moment when only a lost sea can be heard, a time to recollect every shadow, everything the earth was losing, a time to think of everything the earth and I had lost, of all that I would lose, of all that I was losing. Thank you.
Thank you, Amitabha. And thank you, Chitra, Monica, and Alex for your readings before. We have been spending a lot of time this past season digging into the archives, and really just what a treat to hear some of those words brought to life by all of you. So thank you all. We're going to shift over to the conversation portion of our evening. And so I'm thrilled to welcome our moderator this evening, Hua Su, to the virtual stage. Hua Su is a staff writer at The New Yorker and an associate professor of English at Vassar College. He serves on the boards of the Asian American Writers Workshop and Critical Minded, an initiative to support cultural critics of color. He is the author of A Floating Chinaman and the forthcoming memoir, Stay True. Hua, take it away.
Thanks, Jafreen, and thanks everyone. I'm a little speechless right now. I'm just here to moderate a conversation, and I just find myself just incredibly moved by the readings and the memories folks have shared. A week ago to this day, actually, a friend and mentor, Greg Tate, great African-American critic, passed away, and I've sort of been in a fog ever since then. And, the past 40 minutes is one of the first times I've felt sort of lifted up. And I think part of that is because you have each reminded me how, a lot of us will hopefully live on in our art and the influence we leave behind, kindness or gestures that someone carries on in the future beyond us. So, thank you very much for your readings. Over the past 30 years, there have been so many different workshops. There's the St. Mark's space, which only exists as a legend in my mind. There's the Koreatown space, when the open mics all seemed to be at this one bar in the East Village, and they would send a van of poets up and down the East Coast. And of course, there's the Chelsea space and the Green Couch. But as we've seen this past year, so many of these events have happened on Zoom. The workshop is so much more than a physical space. It's a community. And I think it's the community that has brought us all back here to this event tonight. Even in these events, I think you feel a warmth and a community that, seems all too fleeting nowadays. So, I would just love to open it by maybe Chitra, you could start. What are your first memories of stepping into the workshop for the first time, and sort of what era was that?
Yeah, I guess that's pretty ancient history now, because it was right around 1996. I came to New York I was living in California in the Bay Area at that time, so I had only heard of the writer's workshop, and I was, so I was going to read there, and it was quite a moment. It was my first novel. I was nervous, but people were so friendly, and I felt that there was a community. There was a place where I could be safe, and I could just present whatever my imagination, what had been important to my imagination, my understanding of being a person of color in America, and it would be accepted, maybe not agreed with, maybe there would be debates, and indeed there were after the reading, but it was like family. It was kind of like family. And for those of you who live in the New York area, maybe, you know, I don't know, you probably went to the workshop more often than I did. Maybe you took it for granted, but for me, it was quite something. It was quite different. I felt like I was, I don't know, in a living history space. And then later I did come back again. I'm pretty sure I remember that green couch too. But I definitely remember the first time I read, and that was at St. Mark's Place. And yeah, it was quite something. I felt I was reading differently when I read at the workshop. I could just, you know, I could just be myself. I didn't have to explain anything. And I think that's what the workshop gave us. It gave us a place to be ourselves. And then, you know, books like this one, and I have a lot of the workshop's books because they just opened me up to writers of my cultural background or the larger Asian background that I would never have come across otherwise. You know, I think that's what one of the things that the workshop did for us is it opened, you know, it just opened my notion of literature, and it gave me so many voices, it gave me so many histories. And in some way, in some kind of subconscious, subterranean way, that affected me, who I was, and my writing. And I think that continues.
Thank you. That's beautiful. Alex, I would love to hear from you. You know, it's funny, you are your own icon right now, and yet I still remember learning about you through the workshop and sort of everyone at the workshop talking about your work and their admiration for you, and I still bring that sort of like awe, you know, even to this day. So, you know, I would love to hear some of your memories, Alex.
Well, thank you so much. That all means so much to me. Yeah, I wouldn't be the writer I am without the workshop. It's very clear to me. You know, I first came in after getting an email from Kwang Bao and Hanya Nagihara, who were had just read my first published essay in the anthology Boys Like Us. It was a coming out essay, and they asked me to come and hang out with them and told me about the workshop. And this was still in the St. Mark's space. I met my agent after reading at an open mic in the basement of the St. Mark's space. I met my first editor for my first novel at a panel on Asian American masculinity. And I think by then the workshop had moved to Koreatown, if I remember this right. And I launched Edinburgh, my first novel, in that Koreatown space. I don't think I ever took the workshop for granted. I was also part of those caravans, by the way. Sometimes they were in vans, but sometimes they flew us. Like, I remember going to Bowling Green and going with Ishel Park and a couple of other writers, and just feeling like so much possibility. And I think that sense of the space that that Chitra described was also true for me. I think, you know, the conversations I had about, were we writing to each other or were we writing past each other? Those conversations are still informing decisions I make about my career. You know, all those kinds of things were just incredibly important. But especially like getting Korean takeout in Koreatown and then dropping in to see folks, or there was some like roof bar across from
Mhm.
the workshop.
Yeah, that was a super sketchy roof bar. It was tiny, as I remember. It was like one table under some sort, like a sheet of corrugated plastic or something. It was
It was glorious.
mhm. Well, I think I first went to the workshop. I don't know which space this was because I was very hazy on a lot of things. I guess I had finished the Stegner and I was coming to New York and I was working as a corporate lawyer, as was Ken Chen at the time. And I was just perennially really sleep deprived. But I was asked to read. And I remember several of the Van Leer fellows were reading. I remember Aimee Nezhumadtathil was one of them. And that was the first time I had ever met her. And just feeling like, oh, okay, there's so much I'm missing out on. Like, here's a community that I never realized existed. And how can I get more involved with them? So, and I just hadn't, I think growing up in Houston, when I did, like, I was like, there was no K-Town when I was there, it was like this, it was like always being the only Asian person in the class and always being the only Asian person, and then going to college and grad school and never having a professor of color, much less an Asian professor, teaching me English. And then all of a sudden being like, oh, wait a second, there are people with whom I could share like experiences and literature and making and all of this stuff. So that was it was obvious to so many other people, but it wasn't to me. And then running into Alex a lot and with his suit. I think you were carrying around Queen of the Night in manuscript form in a suitcase like a lot of the time at this point. I remember you showing up at a party and I'm like, wait a second, don't forget your suitcase, man. That's your novel. That's a big novel. And I think you read tarot at one of the fundraisers or something.
Yes.
Do I have that right? Yeah.
Yes.
And then I got to know Amitabha on the board. So maybe I hand it over to Amitabha.
Yeah, with time, everything kind of blurs. But Chitra mentioned going down into the basement. Didn't we have to pass, of the St. Mark's Place? Didn't we have to pass through like a clothing store or a Gap store or something?
Yeah.
Do you guys remember? What was it?
Yeah. That was really strange.
Yeah, that's what I remember. My first book was released in that space. We had a,
Wait, I'm sorry. You had to walk through a store to get to the workshop.
It was like above a Gap or something.
Yes, a Gap or something like that. It was that kind of a store.
I think it was a Gap. I think it was a Gap.
Yeah. And then
we used to say, fall into the gap as we walked into the workshop.
And, because of the Contours of the Heart anthology came out in 98. But for me, at least, the Signal event had been the previous year, which had been the independence celebration. And around that, there were lots of activities planned. And a very clear memory that I have is of samosas being laid out and a sign there saying, fight racism, buy samosas. And I was like, oh, okay. Andy Chow was very active, Kwang Bao. And Andy Chow also was taking on editorial jobs at that time. And he was also active, even though he was in publishing, he would come to academic things like American Studies Association meeting. And I thought there were two institutions that I was drawn to. One, Chitra will know, is the India Abroad newspaper, but that was the shallow identitarian Post. The theoretically sophisticated, culturally hip, politically radical Post was the AAWW. And that's where you went for, the hipper things. And I have So it's been a great journey. And I must say that the idea of having a community or having friendships that become this other family has been for me the reality of the Asian American Writers Workshop.
Mhm. Yeah, I remember I launched my second book there with like a band. I was playing with Matmos, who had done this set around my book, and which involved, like, I think at one point we had gone to a hunting supply store and bought a bunch of bird calls, which we handed out to everyone in the audience. So everyone in the audience was playing these bird calls for some reason that, as far as I could tell, had nothing to do with poetry, but it was just kind of fun, you know. Then there was definitely a ball peen hammer and some sheet metal and of course a brick. But yeah, that was, yeah, just, you know, stuff like that tended to happen. It was just a strange kind of magical space. I was working as a corporate lawyer. I had some more money at that point. So my big idea for a fundraiser is I would buy this gorgeous, like robin's egg blue Vespa. Does anyone remember the Vespa? And so there was this Vespa sitting in the space for, I don't know, almost a year. And like visiting writers would pose on it. And it was theoretically this raffle, but it just kind of became part of the space. And this Vespa was sitting there. Eventually we did raffle it off. And I think we, you know, cleared a few $1,000 on, you know, in profit on it. So that was good. But it was just like, okay. And then there's this Vespa sitting there, you know, whatever. And eventually the green couch.
I just remember the books. There were stacks and stacks of books all over the place. And, you know, you could just look through them. You never knew what you would find. It was always such a pleasure. It was like a real treasure house.
The bookstore was a big part of my experience of the workshop when it existed. And I was seeing a tweet from Marie Myung-Ok Lee earlier today about the new Asian American woman-owned bookstore, You and Me, which she was just saying like how much she has missed it. Yeah, I'm really glad that that's there now.
You know, we're obviously here to pay tribute to the past, but also to commit to the future. And I'm wondering, are there, you know, you're all legends. I'm wondering if there are any writers or things you've read this year that might have flown under the radar that you'd love for our audience members to know about. Maybe people you even heard at the workshop.
Well, I read the nonfiction book that you have written, Hua, and whose publication we are awaiting. I think it is fabulous. You know, you are the living legend. So that's great. But maybe others can think about other books.
I mean, I just last night I was reading Grace M. Cho's book, Haunting the Diaspora, which I hadn't actually read before. I've had it for a while, but, you know, finally cracked into it and was really struck by her framing of the question, which is, we've all known about, you know, the exploitation of Korean sex workers and Korean women as a result of the US presence in Korea for 40 years. So why was no one talking about it in the 90s? And having grown up, I think, in that silence, like, what does that mean, even for families that were not directly affected by that aspect of the diaspora? And the, you know, and the quotation that she gives, which is that something like 50% of Korean American immigrants have as a member of their family somebody who was either a war bride or a sex worker from Korea, and how widespread both the diaspora and the silence are. And I was just kind of fascinated by not only the fact of that, but also her kind of lyric analysis of it. So that's what I've been thinking about.
I spent some time looking, speaking of that, looking for Nora Okeler, who was one of the few writers who was writing and talking about that back then. in her novels. And I do it periodically. After the death of Justin Chin, who apparently had died having given up writing, which broke my heart when I learned that. I take more time to look for the people who we don't hear from after some time, to try to find out, like, what's going on, what do they need. I think so much energy and capital is focused on the promotion of new writers, rightly so. We need them, certainly. But increasingly, as I think about like how I want to give back to this community, I'm thinking about like fellowships for writers who are coming back in, because it's so hard if you have given up to come back, in the way that your life may have like built itself up around you in a way that doesn't let you write anymore. Justin was an EMT when he died at 46, and he'd published 7 books. So it's part of why I created a fellowship with Christine Lee at Lambda in his name. It's like one of the things that I'm trying to do now.
I want to just very quickly mention, because we are talking about writers, especially young writers who died prematurely. This book by Numair Atif Chaudhry, a young Bangladeshi writer who unfortunately died in a swimming accident in Japan while he was waiting for this book to come out, Babu Bangladesh. I really think that he is, the Bangladeshi Bolaño. I also read The House of Sticks by Lee Tran, and I learned more about, immigrant children, especially Asian children coming into this country and the sorts of labor they are involved in. And it was poignant for me to be reading about her experience in a mother's nail shop, because that was around the time those murders took place in Atlanta, I think it was. Also, a young Afghani writer out on the West Coast, Jamil Jan Kochai. His short story, The Haunting of Haji, I think it's called. It came out in the New York Times, a short story, in the New Yorker short story. And I'm very interested in that writer who is not speaking out of a more traditional setting, but is actually speaking as a child growing up, first generation in near San Francisco or somewhere, So that's very interesting to me. The idea of this, folks from Afghanistan or Iran writing, and this book by this writer from Bangladesh. I thought that was extraordinary.
Can you hold that up again?
Yeah.
Babu Bangladesh?
Yeah. It's an exorbitant language. It's very exuberant. It's goes on. It's loquacious. It's as some of us are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to just draw everyone's attention to the margins. The magazine. Right. I think that's been doing such a great job, and it's been really wonderful to have that. To be able to look at what's being published there. So I want to just say a thank you for that. Yeah, I think it continues the spirit of the workshop in a very nice way and very contemporary way. It's, in these days of the pandemic, it's been wonderful to have that as a resource. And I've come across a number of writers I hadn't known about through the margins. So I recommend it to everyone in the audience who may not be familiar with it.
And I'm thinking about kind of the generations of influence that are at work and how so much of that was not memorialized because, I'm old enough to remember growing up as a writer pre-internet, when as an Asian American writer, you had very few ways to find other Asian American writers unless you happened to have a teacher who had some knowledge or lived in a community that that had some existing structure. But otherwise, it was very easy to feel, I think, very isolated. And so it makes me feel that more appreciative. You know, I'm thinking of this in a poetry context, but, you know, of the John Yaos and of the, you know, Myung-Mi Kims and of the, you know, people who were there providing often really quite unappreciated mentorship during that time. And, you know, thinking about what we can do as a community to memorialize that influence before it's gone, honestly.
Yes, while they're alive.
Mhm.
You're all a part of this living legacy, and I just wanted to thank everyone once more for your tremendous work, but also the grace and gratitude you've shown tonight. You know, the workshop is sort of this testament to the fact that you're not alone. You know, we are not alone, and we never have been. And it's here for all of us. I just wanted to thank the ASL interpreters, Lily, Heshvarya, Jafreen, workshop staff and interns, present and past. Thank you so much to everyone who tuned in tonight as well. And I'll hand it off to Jafreen.
Thank you, Hua. Thank you, all of our speakers tonight. It's been so special just to sit back and listen and learn and kind of bask in all of your memories. Thank you to our partners at Pro Bono ASL for providing ASL interpretation this evening. As I mentioned, this is our final event of our AAWW at 30 retrospective. You can catch up on all of our previous events on our YouTube channel. This event will be added to that archive shortly. Stay up to date with our notebook that's in the process of being published in the magazine. The next installment will actually go up tomorrow, looking at it'll actually include reflections from staff, past and present, on the physical space of the workshop and the different iterations that it has held over the past 3 decades. So keep an eye out for that, and all of our work and all of our programming at aaww.org. Thank you all for being here. Have a great night, have a great week, have a great holiday, New Year, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.